Hey guys, in this video, I'm going to talk about two ways you can make money with midterm rentals without owning the property: co-hosting and rental arbitrage. Now, there are a lot of things that are similar between these two strategies and a lot of differences here. And I have to thank Chris, who's in our school community, who posted some very detailed questions here about co-hosting and arbitrage. He's considering starting these businesses and wants to understand the pros and cons of both. And as I have experience with both, I thought I would make a nicer, longer video answering his questions and sharing it with you all because I believe what I've learned and what I'm going to share in this video will be helpful for any of you who are exploring these two business models. If you're interested in our school community, there's going to be a link in the description. Check it out. It's a free community about all things MTR. We do weekly calls to answer questions, and we get guest speakers. Our first guest speakers we had 2 weeks ago was Jesse Vasquez himself. So come hang out with us. Love to have you there. All right. So to start off, I'm gonna give some definitions, right? And you might, in case you're not familiar with these terms, very brief definitions, and then I'm going to jump right into these questions that Chris posted. They're great questions about these strategies. So high level, co-hosting, it's similar to property management, but there is a difference. So I'm just going to stick with co-hosting, not talk about property management here. But co-hosting is essentially you are helping a owner of a mid-term rental manage his property, right? So that can mean you are creating the listing, answering inquiries, getting the property booked, doing customer service for the tenants, maybe scheduling maintenance, cleaning, all that stuff. But you're not a property manager. You are essentially assisting the owner as a co-host. The term co-host really was coined by Airbnb with their co-host feature, so it kind of has been adopted in this industry. So that's one model there, and generally, the pricing, the fee is a percentage of the rent. You can do a flat fee co-hosting service. That's possible as well. It's not as common. Now, rental arbitrage, it's a little bit different. How you manage the property once you have the property is similar, but the acquisition side of how you first set the deal is different. So rental arbitrage, to put it briefly, is you would go sign a 12-month lease, typically, for an unfurnished long-term rental and get the permission of the landlord to furnish it and then sublet it as an MTR. It could also be STR, depending on the property, what you're doing. But essentially, you're furnishing it and subletting it as a furnished rental. And then you have a fixed cost, of course, of the rent that you're paying as the tenant. You are paying utilities, which is another cost, and there's some other costs as well. And then hopefully the goal, of course, is that you rent it out as a furnished rental for more than your costs and you make a profit, right? That's rental arbitrage. So two different ways, again, to make money with MTRs with other people's properties. Very high level. Let's jump into the questions. First question here about arbitrage is, how do you make sure that your lease protects your right to sublease without any, Chris wants to avoid a situation, of course, the landlord can shut you down, right? That kind of risk. So to give you some context, we don't do rental arbitrage anymore. We literally have one property left that we have that model with. I do property management for midterm rentals in Los Angeles. That's my main thing now. But if I kind of add it up, we've probably done somewhere probably over 30, definitely over 25, maybe over 30 rental arbitrage properties over the years in the past. So that's the kind of experience, that I've done. And I'll say with that kind of sample size, uh, it's very rare where a situation was sorry, we haven't had a situation, right, where a owner wants to kick us out uh, because they don't want us to do the strategy anymore. Um, Yeah, there are situations where I would say there's only one situation where the owner of the property sold the property and the new owner didn't want us to do the model. That's a rare situation. But otherwise, the long term, you think about the long term landlord, what do they want, right? What's important to them? They want their rent, right? Paid on time. They want tenants who take care of the property. Uh, and really, as a rental arbitrage operator, if you're doing things right, it's actually better for the landlord because there's less maintenance. They don't have like a high ma needy tenant, right? Or like an unreasonable tenant to deal with because they have you, a professional. Yeah. So my point here is that unless you're doing things in a way that's harmful to the landlord, they're not going to try to kick you out. As far as the specific question for the lease, simple. You just have to have either a section in a clause in the lease itself, or you have addendum, same thing, that specifically gives you the right to sublet. A lot of leases actually have a clause that says you cannot sublet. So if the landlord already has a lease that they use, then you just make that negotiate that change there. Um, yeah, and of course the actual wording and language, get an attorney to make it, bulletproof. But yeah, that's it for that question. So next question. Some people talk about, so we have another member on our community who mentioned, if the property can the profits of the rental arbitrage can pay off the initial furnishing costs in 6 months. For that particular person, he was saying that's like his benchmark of if rental arbitrage is worthwhile here, right? That is not that number is not set in stone. It's obviously a personal number for you to decide if it's worthwhile for you. But Chris's question here is, what's your survival plan then if it takes 10 to 12 months to pay off or longer to pay off the furnishing? Again, this comes down to your goals. If you plan to keep this property for 3 years, 5 years, then taking 1 year to pay off the furnishing could make sense. But that means you won't make any money for the first year. So what is your goal there, right? Um, with any rental arbitrage deal, you really have to analyze the numbers and get an idea of how long it'll take. If you were expecting it to get paid off in 6 months and it took 12 months, then I think there was some massive misstep in the estimates of either you spent too much on furnishing or you got way less income than you thought you did. Right? I think that's the bigger issue there in that situation. Next question. When it comes to using 0% credit cards to pay for furniture, so this is a lot of cards to give you a promotional period, like first 12 months, 0%. Also, like stores like Amazon, IKEA, they have their own cards that give you 0% promotional credit if you order a certain amount, right? Like a minimum over 500, over 1,000. So that's a great way to furnish a property. If your analysis tells you could pay off the property in 6 months, and the credit cards have 0%, pay interest for 12 months, you're gold, right? You basically don't have to pay for furniture out of pocket, and the profits of the property pay off the card. So the question here is, how do you manage the risk if occupancy steadily drops? So this is similar to the first question, right? If you're making way less money than you thought, essentially you just have to have a backup plan for your cards. Are you just do you have your own reserves that you'll pay off the credit cards before the promotional period ends? Are you going to roll it into do a balance transfer to another card that has a promotion so you could extend your 0% period? I think the safe thing to do, depends on your risk tolerance, is to have some reserves of cash. Yeah, I'll kind of keep that one brief. So moving on to some co-hosting questions. Here's one question is, how do you price your services? That's the kind of general question. But the more specific part of this question is you want to reflect your value, but you don't want to scare off potential clients if your price is too high. This is a really interesting question when it comes to sales and marketing. I've learned in my experience that I undervalue what I offer. So there's kind of two numbers for co-host. So co-hosting is really, I do property management, which is similar to co-hosting. But there's two kind of fees. I would say the main fees for new properties is there's the monthly percentage, right? That we charge based on the rent collected. We also do a one-time onboarding fee up front because there's a lot of setup for a new property. So for both those numbers, especially the onboarding fee, I started off way too low. And then I was scared to raise it because I thought people would think it's too expensive. But the current rate, the current number we have it at, which is 1,500, very, very few people have a problem with that. So really, it's this understanding of sometimes if you set your price what it should be and someone doesn't want to pay it, that may be a filter that you want to avoid customers that you don't want, if you know what I mean. If you think about like McDonald's, right, versus like a high-end, like burger at a restaurant. McDonald's is going to attract a certain customer. Makes sense because of the pricing, right? And that's what McDonald's wants. If and I would say closer to our industry, the other analogy I could think of is if you, especially if you're doing short-term rentals, if you price certain days really low because you want to get it booked and it's, no, maybe it's going to go vacant, sometimes it's not worth it because you get a really bad guest and it's just not worth the trouble at that point. Maybe they cause damages. You end up losing money because of that booking. So you have to think about that as well when you do pricing. Easy first step is to just research the market and what options your potential customers have, right? We charge 15% for midterm rental property management. If all of our competitors charge the same amount or higher, I don't need to think about, lowering my fee because what other options do they have? They could choose to self-manage it, right? But a property owner who wants to self-manage is not ultimately who we're trying to serve. So I think this is really more of a less of a tactical question, more of like an emotional fear question. Um, yeah. Next question about co-hosting. If a owner refuses to invest in safety upgrades, how do you handle that without burning the relationship? This is also a question that is very closely related to picking the right clients. Right? The property owner is the client here. Uh, if I mean, short answer here is if this was like a specific situation, if that client or that potential client, the property owner, is not willing to spend money on things that are very obviously needed at a property, I would not want that client as a co-hosting client. I'm going to move on because that already reveals many future issues that you will have with this client, right? It reveals it's not really about that one specific issue. It's like, oh, I don't want to pay for I don't know what safety upgrades might be. Maybe it's like the smoke detectors are expired. Oh, it's fine. I don't want to pay for new ones. It works still, right? That's not going to be a one-off situation. That's going to keep coming up in all the things that are needed for the property down the line, right? So that is a customer screening question there, right? You got to set your standards on what kind of customers, what you require of the properties that you want to co-host. Next question about co-hosting. What's your approach when an owner's design choice? So this is a very common question, but difficult. When the owner's design choice clearly hurts the appeal of the property and, of course, its income potential, right? How well it can get booked. I talked about this in depth in two separate calls in our community this past week. But basically, same theme going on, right? This is going to be another question that filters out the wrong clients that you don't want. So the first thing is that the first thing to do, of course, is to see if the owner will change their interior design. Maybe as a coach, you could offer some help with that or refer them to an interior designer. Or if you kind of have that eye, you could tell them specifically the changes to make. Of course, it will cause them some time, effort, some money. And that is the fork in the road, right? Is this owner going to say, I trust you. You're the expert. If this is what makes my property, make more money, I will do it. I will invest in that upfront because I believe what you're saying. If the owner is like, no, I don't want to spend any more money, I don't care, right? Then the next fork in that flow chart is you could part ways because the property does not meet your standards, or you could communicate to the owner that, all right, I will manage the property as it is, and with whatever income it will make, I believe it will make less than it potentially could make, but I can still manage it for you because ultimately, as a co-host, you have no expense, right? You're not at risk. You'll charge your fee based on what you rent it for, but the owner might not get what they need, right? But then you made that clear to them why the property is underperforming. And then it's even more convincing. Let's say 3 months in, 6 months in, you do a review with the owner, say, hey, look at the numbers. It's below the market for a comparable property, and we think here's why. We recommend making some investments to upgrade the property and the design, and then they could decide now that they have data if they want to say yes or no. Right. So again, you'll see the theme here with co-hosting. With arbitrage, you have more control, but also more risk. But with co-hosting, there's definitely this need to screen out the right owners and properties. In my experience, it's screening the owner is more important. The property is kind of straightforward. Like you see the photos, you see the address, you see the neighborhood, but then the owner's behavior and kind of how much control they want, how much they're willing to or not willing to spend money, that oftentimes, in my experience, has disqualified a co-hosting property. All right. Last question here under the co-hosting section that Chris wrote is, how do you earn enough trust that an owner stops micromanaging guest selection and day-to-day decisions? Ooh, another great question, all on the same theme here. My first, the first thing I'll say very briefly is you don't. If they don't already trust you when they first sign up, that's something more, it says more about them than about you. Uh, the way I see it is you're not trying to earn their trust after they signed up with you and then you're managing it. After they signed up and you're managing the property is when you confirm, or I don't know what's the opposite of the word confirm. Either confirm or unconfirm what the owner, the client, thought of you when they signed up, right? The owner has to trust you enough when they first sign up. That's in the sales process and all the questions they ask, and you share about your experience. That's when you earn their trust to get them to sign up. Now, after they sign up, you have to continue, right? Essentially, keep your promises that you made so they don't cancel. Oftentimes, an owner who does not who is micromanaging, it's not really about that they don't trust you. It's it's about they can't let go. They need to have control. And it doesn't matter which co-host they hire. It could be you or another co-host. It could be a super experienced co-host. They will still do the same thing. And again, their micromanaging is more about them than it is about what they think about you as a co-host. So again, this question comes back to selecting the right owners for co-hosting. So I love these questions. This is how I want to make this video, right? Last few questions here. This is kind of just more about kind of applies to both strategies. So again, Chris's context, and maybe for you this is relevant, is you want to start a MTR business and you're not sure if co-hosting or arbitrage is the best thing to start with. I will say you can do both, right? But let's say you're trying to focus and like which one do you prefer? And really the pros and cons, right? Because I know many people who have great co-hosting businesses and people who have great rental arbitrage businesses, and that's all their properties. It both can work. Uh, of course, depends on the market, right? So some strategies are better for certain markets. That's pros and cons. So you want to pick everything has, its negatives. So I pick your poison is what I often say. So this question kind of gets to that. Is it better to start with co-hosting to build cash flow and then transition on into arbitrage, or do both from day one? The way I see this, if I were to kind of, again, boil it all down to make it very, very, just like the biggest differences, arbitrage, rental arbitrage. If you are down for, and you, both the work and the risk, because some of this is emotional, right? Of, um, having certain months where you don't make enough money to cover the rent, property goes vacant, right? You have your rent payments as doing arbitrage, and your property is not getting booked. You got to pay that rent still, right? The first of the month is coming up. You got to pay that rent. If that's something you can manage when it comes to the stress, and you also maybe have the cash reserves for that, right? And the kind of big picture thinking, right? That is the main challenge of rental arbitrage. Again, compared to co-hosting, right? Once you're listed the property and you're dealing with guests, it's all the same for both properties. On the flip side, if you are down for, or maybe even enjoy dealing with owners, the co-hosting clients, the questions they have, the owners who are more micromanaging, the owners who have, all these like very specific questions, or owners who aren't willing to spend enough money. If you're down with dealing with that, then that is the hardest part of co-hosting, right? So that's really the two negatives on both sides. Comparing those two, and you have to ask yourself which, again, pick your poison, which one you're more okay with, right? If I'm starting on purpose for on the cons, right? Those are the cons of the two. The pros of the two strategies are kind of typically right opposite. So the pros of rental arbitrage is control, right? You're furnishing the property, so you can make it the way you think it'll do best. There's no question to the owner, about the furnishing. So you got that. Cool. Cons of co-hosting. I'm sorry. Pros of co-hosting is you don't have to furnish anything. It's actually very low ex cost and overhead as far as your expenses. Like for me, we're at 38 properties now. We're managing 38 doors. And our main expenses are our team members, because obviously I can't do it all myself. But really, each individual property that you sign up, you don't really have a cost. As opposed to arbitrage, you're paying for furniture, you're paying for the maybe the first month rent, security deposit, utilities, all these things. So co-hosting, you don't have to deal with any of that. And that's really why I chose co-hosting. But then you have to deal with the owners. And I'm okay with dealing with owners. I kind of prefer that. Sometimes I enjoy it. Um, as far as whether to do one or the other or both, I don't see any reason to not to that you can't do both strategies. But here's the thing. Every property owner, they will have a preference between rent arbitrage and co-hosting. I'll say that again. If you meet and connect with someone who owns a property, they could have it as a long-term unfurnished rental, or maybe they're self-managing the mid rental. Um, that owner will have based on their goals and their temperament and all of that personality, they will have a preference whether they want to do a co-hosting model or arbitrage, right? So I'll kind of give you kind of a plain example here is the owner who wants their fixed income every month probably will prefer renting to you for rent arbitrage. But the owner who's like an investor trying to maximize their cash flow is they're okay with more risk, they probably want to do co-hosting, right? And especially if they're self-managing it, that obviously is furnished already, and they clearly already decided that they're okay with a furnished rental and they just want help with it, then they're just hiring you to co-host, right? So I would say if you're starting off, make connections, offer value, network, and then as you meet different potential clients, you could and understand like you want to ask them about their goals and what their pain points and what's hard for them. Then you could figure out which strategy to kind of offer to them as a way for that you could help, right? Between arbitrage and co-hosting. So that's kind of how I see it. As you start scaling, you can make a decision whether you want to focus on one. Technically, there's some differences as far as like accounting and stuff like that, where if you do both strategies, you kind of have to do accounting like separately. So one of the reasons why we slowly got rid of our arbitrage properties, well, one reason is a lot of them were not worth it anymore, right? They're barely making any money, breaking even. Some of them were losing money. Um, but also, even if the ones that were making money, I kind of want to get rid of them because I just want to streamline my business. So it's all property management slash co-hosting, right? So it makes everything more streamlined. And that's more of a question when you have enough properties that becomes important to you. All right, couple of questions left here. How do you consistently prove your values and you can raise rates over time without pushback? I'm assuming this question is talking about the co-hosting. Well, just I'll answer it both ways. If Chris is asking about rates that you charge for like co-hosting, I would say the goal is not to raise those rates. Like our rate is 15%. I'm not going to raise the rate because part of it too, that's going to make your customers unhappy. Unless you're actually going to offer them more services, right? It doesn't make sense to raise your rates. Um, if we're talking about the rates that you're renting a property for, like the rates you market the property and rent it out to a tenant, uh, I'm not sure if that's what this is asking either, because consistently improving your value to tenants, um, I mean, if that's what the question is, then I would say it's you're getting good reviews, and you're just marketing the property in the right way so the tenant you're trying to attract, sees the property and like, that's exactly what they're looking for. So I can't really answer that one too well because I'm not sure what it's asking. So feel free to comment in here, Chris, or maybe just comment in the our school community, and I'll definitely clarify. All right. Last question. What's your plan if a property suddenly becomes uninhabitable due to damage or maintenance issues? This question sounds like, a dire situation, but it's very simple. If you're doing rental arbitrage, think about it if you were a tenant living at the property and then something happens, the property is damaged, you can't live there. Well, according to landlord tenant law, and of course it differs in different states, but if the property is uninhabitable, you're released from your lease, right? Um, the lease part's taken care of, right? Because a landlord can't keep requiring you to pay rent if the property is like like a tree fell through the roof or something. Uh, this does kind of touch on the whole, for again, rent arbitrage. If it's your furniture, you can get insurance, not for the property because it's not yours, right? But insurance for your furnishing and all the stuff you have in the home, right? The smart lock, the kitchen appliances, whatever it is, it belongs to you, right? Different question, but related. Now, if it's a co-hosting property and becomes uninhabitable, no loss to you, right? That's something the owner has to deal with. Obviously, you can't co-host that property anymore, and you can't rent it out and make money. Kind of sucks, but there's no loss to you. It just lost potential income, right? So really, this is a question for that affects the owner. The risk is really on the owner. But that's it. That's really,